Hello and welcome. We are going to today be discussing about a new, upcoming and exciting book called India in Search of Glory, Political Calculus and Economy, with the author of the book, Dr. Ashok K. Lahiri, who is a member of the 15th Finance Commission, a member of the West Bengal Legislative Assembly, and a former Chief Economic Advisor of India. The book is an expansive look at the political economy of India. It's highly detailed and very, very deeply researched, and there's a lot that we can learn about what happened before and how it can inform the political economy going forward. Thank you so much, sir, for joining us. So, sir, we start with the first question. You've named the book India in Search of Glory. Now, India is the fifth largest economy in the world, and it is the fastest growing major economy. Would this not constitute this elusive glory that you talk about?
Sharad, there is no doubt that it's a matter of great satisfaction that we are the fifth or sixth largest economy, depending on which year you take, and the fastest growing. However, you must remember that in 1970, the former Soviet Union still existed. India was the 10th.
Right.
It was US, Soviet Union, then there was Germany, Japan, France, UK, Italy, China, and Canada, in that order. By 2022, as you can see, Soviet Union has ceased to exist, and India has overtaken France, Italy, and Canada. Now, the post-independence performance of the Indian economy has been far better than the previous 350 years. No doubt about that. In the past 350 years preceding independence, the rate of growth was only 0.25% per year.
Wow.
So compared to that, we are doing very well. You can say that fine, we're doing very fine. But it will be too premature to say that we have achieved the glory. Why? Why do I say that? India has about 17.7% of the world's population.
Yes.
But its share of world GDP is still a little less than 3%.
Right.
3% and 17.7%. We have a long way to go. When we compare countries like France or Japan or Germany, we forget that they're much smaller countries. For every German, we have, I think, there's 17 Indians.
Wow.
And for every Japanese, there are more than 11 Indians. So
Right.
our GDP should also be much bigger.
Right.
That's the reason I say that we can't conclude that just because we are the fifth or sixth largest. We're the second largest in terms of population.
So we're not being able to convert the labor into output. Is that one of the problems?
There are many problems. Of course, that's a broader question about lack
Right.
of development, which the book is all about. But coming back to your question that whether it's time to hang our boots and say we've achieved is premature. And fastest growing, yes. But unless we're the fastest growing, we'll never catch up. How will you catch up?
Of course.
So I'm not surprised. Athona shochami navishayami. I mean, we should be fastest growing for years, and our neighbors to the east have done it for a long time. Japan, Hong Kong, Korea, Singapore, Taiwan, and now China. For decades, they have grown at very fast rates, and we need to do that.
Right. And now, in this search for glory, there have been several episodes that you've mentioned in the book that also kind of resonate now. So, for example, the Babri Masjid, the Ram Mandir issue. Do you feel that that issue has now been put to rest? Is it done? Can we move past it?
I hope so, but I can't be definitive about it. Now, the book argues that India, we have made great strides in reinforcing our nation. It was there. I mean, there is unity in diversity, but that had to be reinforced. Now, in the 18th and 19th century, nation building was a project that even European countries did. We have mentioned about it, how France built Frenchmen, how Italy built Italians. And India also, we are doing it, and I think we have done a fairly good job, but it's not complete by any chance. See, I mention here that in the book by Eugene Weber, it says that the title of the book was I think something from peasants to Frenchmen.
Right.
They were not French, identity was not there. Now, in nation building, historical events can play a major role.
Right.
You remembering what my great-grandfather did to your great-grandfather or vice versa can be a great source of conflict. So here, I am quoting, the book quotes Ernest Renan, the 19th century French scholar, who said, I quote, "Forgetting, I would even say historical error, is an essential factor in the creation of a nation, and it is for that reason that the progress of historical studies often poses a threat to nationality. Historical inquiry, in effect, throws light on the violent acts that have taken place at the origin of every political formation, even those that have been the most benevolent in their consequences." I hope, as you ask, that the Ram Janambhoomi Babri Masjid issue is over and there has been reconciliation. But I hope so, at least, because after the Second World War, who could have imagined that the French and the Germans, who are so hostile to each other, killed so many of each other, they're part of the European Union.
Together, yes.
Together. So why can't we do that? But I can't give you a definitive answer whether it's over or not.
Right.
But I am an optimist and I hope it's over.
Right. And similarly, the J&K issue has come up several times in your book. Every decade or so, it seems that it crops up as an issue for the government. Now, with the abrogation of Article 370, do you feel that that has been a successful way to end troubles there, or to at least see them a lot lower than they were? Or do you again see that it's going to keep coming up?
See, in the book I mentioned J&K, but I'm not very definitive about it.
Right.
This is only to indicate that the nation building is a still process, is work under progress. Now you ask about Article 370. I'm not an expert in this matter, but I'll only make 3 points. One, first point I'll make that in a country, laws should be uniform. It should be equal treatment of everyone. There can be short periods when you have unequal treatment because of historical reasons, but it cannot be forever. The second point I make is you cannot have something which hasn't solved the problem and you still believe that continuing with that will resolve the problem. 370 you had for 7 decades almost.
Right.
It didn't resolve the problem. So to say that to continue with Article 370 will resolve everything
is no solution.
Right. Third is, again, as I said, I'm not an expert, but from newspapers what I read, that after the COVID pandemic is over, that at least education system in Jammu and Kashmir is going back to normal times. So there are hopeful signs, but I wouldn't give you a definitive answer that the Jammu and Kashmir problem is over. It's again work under progress.
And now coming to a little more of a recent time, we're looking at the UPA government, and you've spent actually quite a lot of time talking about the UPA. You have spoken about all the reforms that they brought in, but also about some of the troubles that they had, such as the policy paralysis and some allegations of corruption. Now, do you feel that these allegations of corruption and the paralysis that they saw undid the reforms that they brought in, like the right to food, the right to information, and Narega? Or do you feel that the reforms themselves stood strong enough and that the reputation of the UPA, future historians will look back at it and look at the reforms rather than the problems that they suffered?
Very interesting question. See, when you talk about the UPA government, there are two UPA governments, UPA 1 and UPA 2. They're very different. Now, the first one was from 2004 to 2009, and the second was from 2009 to 2014.
Yes.
You remember that. Now, the first UPA government did a lot of things. As you must have seen, part 4 of the book, it says reforms with its ups and downs. And since the whole thesis, my thesis is politicians formulate policies to win elections.
Right.
They don't win elections to formulate policies. So in a way, what Obama said, don't blame the politicians, blame yourselves. You are electing who, and what they are doing what you want them to do.
Right.
So I call it reforms with its ups and downs because it's tremendous continuity in policy formation.
Right.
So look at two things, VAT, value added tax, and FRBM.
Yes.
Both were started with NDA and implemented by the
UPA.
UPA 1.
Right.
So that you have to take care of it. Now, UPA 1 also tried to fund education through a cess on all taxes. It launched the National Rural Health Mission. It tried to improve rural health, and especially in areas like maternal mortality rate, infant mortality rate, and what was the last one? And to reduce the total fertility rate. Now, there was also the Rashtriya Swasthya Bima Yojana, National Health Insurance Scheme, and increasing the coverage. But Dhanalakshmi also was there. I mean, there are many schemes that are listed there. But what is remembered is and I must mention that they also had for urban that Jawaharlal Nehru National Urban Renewal.
Yes.
And Bharat Nirbhan.
Right.
So these are all. Now here, how can I forget another great contribution of UPA? The small scale reservation was ended almost, de facto ended during the UPA 1 government,
right.
Which I believe, and I think many people agree with me, that small scale reservation has done a lot of damage to industrialization in India. The idea was to promote small scale, but instead of that, what it did is to keep them small, keep them
right.
off. That was the problem. Now, what UPA 1 is remembered for, however, is the rights-based welfare measures.
Right.
That is what is. I mean, people have forgotten these other things. People only remember that this right to this was there and right to that was there. The Right to Information Act, that was one, which I think was an important thing for removing corruption, throwing daylight onto the inner workings of the government, so that you know what happens. Then the other was the Right to Work or National Rural Employment Guarantee Act. And the third was the enactment of Recognition of Forest Rights Act. The other thing that we must remember, UP1 failed in disinvestment. Absolutely. All governments have struggled with disinvestment process, but UP1 was not successful.
Yes.
That's for certain. The NSC also became controversial. National Advisory Council, which was seen as an extra constitutional body with all the powers, no responsibility.
Right.
And it was outside the government. But more than that, the right-based approach, when you think of the Constitution and our founding fathers, they put a few things as directive principles rather than fundamental rights. The only thing is, it's not justiciable. That's the only thing.
Right.
It's an exhortation that please do it. But if you don't do it, you're not going to be put to prison or hanged by the neck until dead.
Right.
Now, if you make it justiciable, the problem is the government must know the limits of its administrative competence and financial competence.
Absolutely.
We often promise things which are beyond our administrative competence and financial competence. It's a judgment call. I mean, you always try to do what you haven't done so far, and they are pushing yourself. But to say that from tomorrow you'll play like Lionel Messi, I mean, you can improve your football skills, but you'll never become Messi in the next year or so.
Yes.
If not more. So, rights-based, now that is UPA 1. And UPA 1, mind you, it won the election.
Yes.
It won the election.
Absolutely.
I think in UPA 2, there was may have been a judgment error. They thought since we have won, the 2009 election, more rights will again re-elect us.
Right.
And that did not happen. And that is the time when also the corruption cases came up. I mean, corruption cases, you have the 2G or telecom scam, you have the Augusta Westland, Coalgate, of course, Commonwealth Games, and the India Against Corruption, Anna Hazare.
Yes.
So UPA is, I mean, how can I tell you what the historians will say? It's too early to judge that.
Right.
But I think both these factors, one is UPA 1 versus UPA 2, and second is premature rights-based welfareism. Some detractors even say that Mrs. Sonia Gandhi, given her background, she was trying to reproduce the European welfare system in a poor country like India.
Right.
I don't know whether it's true or not, but the fact is, whenever I find politicians promising too much, I feel that maybe it's a ploy to get votes. But people have to see through it. And the recent debate also about populist measures.
Yes, Revdi and all of that.
Now, ultimately in a democracy, you will get as good a democracy as the voters. The voters have to see through my promises. Am I promising them the moon, which I'll never be able to deliver, or am I being realistic?
And now if we come to the government's ability to plan properly, one of the first things that the Modi government did was to get rid of the Planning Commission. So now do you feel that India has indeed graduated to a place where we don't need these kind of 5-year plans and that we can be more dynamic? Or was it a premature decision to do away with the plans?
See, the planning model, as you may have seen in the book, that the first period post-independence, which I call political autonomy,
yes,
and the Nehruvian period, that was the accepted principle or doctrine of the times. Even Samuelson said that socialism is going to win the day. So everyone had planning commission and plans and socialism and so on. Then it didn't work. And we thought that we need to reform it. But the reform was incomplete.
Okay.
And there the book argues that, like you and me, politicians are also human beings. It's very difficult to acknowledge that you've committed an error. So even when you realize that you may have been wrong, you continue with more of the same. Now, look at what happened to planning process. The first thing was the expectation during Nehruvian times, the first few years, was that there would be a what was called CBR, or BCR, balance of current revenues.
Right.
You spend money and then your money left, that is what you plan to spend on various projects. But the BCR had turned negative by the time of the second plan. I think the book talks about it, that when it turned negative, there was nothing to distribute. You had to borrow to spend.
Yes.
So that,
correct.
And that was basically the public sector, instead of producing enough surplus, it was producing a return. It was giving a return which was less than what you're borrowing money for. So the more you spend, the more sort of poor you became. So I have no doubt that the government should not do microplanning. Government needs to focus on a few basic things: education, health, infrastructure.
Okay.
I mean, I keep saying that there are many things that you can do, but you can't build a road in front of your house. Neither can you set up a college or school. Nor can you have a multi-specialty hospital or a primary health center. So the government should focus on that, and it should give policy advice as to what should be the broad direction of the economy. And that is where the policy, Niti Aayog,
yes,
is At least on paper, is supposed to be doing that. I mean, how far it has succeeded on is a different matter.
Right.
That's a different matter.
Yes. The Modi government has kind of fashioned itself as being very pro-business in a way that it wants to make doing business in India far simpler. And so it's come up with quite a few reforms like the GST, IBC, RERA. UPI is one which has really caught the public's imagination and their usage. But on the other side, you have failures like demonetization, which were against businesses, it was against people. And the government has also failed to kind of take advantage of the demographic dividend that we have. It's becoming a little bit like a curse where you got a vast number of unemployed youth and no jobs to give them. So again, how would economic historians look at this Modi government and judge it? Are the reforms outweighing the failures, or are these looming failures just too big to ignore?
No, that's a question that's, I think, impossible to answer. Okay. What economic historians will say in the future. If I knew, then we wouldn't need economic historians. Economic historians, I can't say what they will say. But the last question first, demographic dividend. See, demographic dividend is something that we have been talking about for the last 15, 20 years.
Right.
And why we have failed is that it's a dividend as long as you can teach and train those young boys and girls for the proper job. You can develop the infrastructure. You can develop the industry where these boys and girls can be employed fruitfully and they start producing output. If we can't teach them, we can't give them proper health, and we can't employ them to produce things, rather than a dividend, it can become a liability, a tax.
Absolutely.
I think about demonetization, you use some very strong words, that is anti-people, anti-business. As we discussed in the last question, it's a bit premature to say because demonetization, it's nobody's argument that we have got enough of the money coming back, or not enough coming back. So that's the amount that has been impounded. But still, there can be a psychological impact on corruption. Ye garbar ho jayega. Let's not do it. This government is serious. Apart from these initiatives, what is very important is Modi government is serious about implementation. Right. Implementation, it goes with hammer and tongs. Look at the direct benefit transfer, which the UP had introduced, and they went back.
Right.
Now, I believe that that was not correct. UPA shouldn't have gone back. But Mr. Modi came to power and he immediately introduced it, and it is now going fine. I mean, everyone agrees that unfortunately, we are not ahead in many things of the other countries, but in digitalization, and we have made great progress. And direct benefit transfer is one prime example. The other is national highways. And they're doing Gram Sadak Yojana, Prime Minister Awas Yojana.
Right.
All of them are, but aren't there problems? There are problems. But you may have noticed that when it comes to Modi's first government, I've been rather coy because it's too early to pass a judgment. Not even 3 years have passed since. So we do not have the advantage of a perspective on what happened.
And so now, looking forward, if you could encapsulate what are the points that we should definitely address now in search of glory? What will get us closer to this elusive glory that you talk about?
See, first is education.
Okay.
We have been rather defensive. You see, I remember I grew up in post-independence India. I'm only a few years younger than India, independent India. The fear was that you educate young boys and young girls and don't give them jobs. These will become a problem. What I think we didn't realize, that once I educate these young boys and girls, they will find what to do. You
Right.
don't need to sort of employ everyone in an organized factory. That's not to say that you shouldn't industrialize. So education must be emphasized, and Sarva Shiksha Abhiyan and midday meal scheme, those are great steps ahead, or great steps forward. But what is important is the quality of education.
Right.
So when you look at the Pratham's findings,
Yes.
and teacher absenteeism, I mean, you can send a boy to a school, but if the school is no more than a childcare center, and that also an inferior childcare center, then you're getting very little. So that's
Absolutely.
education.
Right.
And there, I think book mentions somewhere, some economic historians talk about a minimum illiteracy rate,
Yes.
which is 40%. We have crossed that. Now it's, I think, and that you can see everywhere, the burst of entrepreneurship
Right.
that's coming from young boys and girls is very touching. Second is health,
Okay.
because if you're unhealthy and if you're sick, then they can't do anything. And there, I think all the reports are there. Primary healthcare and secondary healthcare is what we should focus on.
Right.
Again, it's not enough to build primary health centers. You have to make sure that the doctors are there, the medicines are there, the proper treatment is there. So that is the second thing. Third is physical infrastructure. Physical infrastructure, there has been great improvement, but we need much more. Fourth is the pro-business, not pro-businessmen attitude. Say, I think in India, because of historical reasons, we have a slightly anti-rich approach.
Right.
That's almost like if you're rich, then you must be a thief. That must be changed. And since you asked me for 5 things, fifth is the recent debate that is going on, that Rewri.
Yes.
But that's a very difficult thing, because politicians like me will say, who are you to tell me what is Rewri and what is not? But we know, the fact of the matter is that there are certain things which does damage to the sovereign in terms of its financial abilities. We have seen that. We have seen that with farm gate waiver. We have seen that with fertilizer subsidy. It's very easy to give a subsidy, but very difficult to withdraw it. So we must be more careful about such freebies.
I understand. So, India in Search of Glory is going to come out in bookstores soon. Please look out for it, and please keep watching The Print. Thank you.